Carvajal, Director of Undocumented and Immigrant Student Programs at CUNY. Welcome to this I Am a Dreamer special. Today we are having a conversation about what options exist to support undocumented students. We need this information because DACA continues to be challenged in the courts. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which was created in 2012 during President Obama's term, and provides work authorization and protection from deportation to eligible undocumented individuals brought to the U.S. at a young age. While DACA is currently only available for renewals, some pundits have pointed towards PRUCOL, permanently residing under color of law, as an opportunity to access social benefits for eligible undocumented people in the United States. The PRUCOL term is used to describe certain non-citizens living in the United States with the knowledge and consent of the Department of Homeland Security. It's important to remember that PRUCOL is not a type of immigration status, but rather an eligibility category for public benefits created by courts. We want to have this important conversation to better understand why people are paying attention to this option, and we will be discussing this today with our guests, who are experts in this field. Joining me today to make sense of it all at the studio are Janet Calvo, professor at the CUNY School of Law, Lisa Cho, a recent graduate from the CUNY School of Law and a DACA recipient, and Jesus Perez, the director of the Immigrant Student Success Office at Brooklyn College. We'll have one-on-one conversations with each one of them, and at the end, we'll all come together to respond to questions or elaborate on comments from CUNY students and liaisons that are involved in efforts to support undocumented and DACA communities. Now we will start with Janet Calvo. Thank you so much for joining me, Janet.
Thank you for having me.
I talked a little bit about DACA, I talked a little bit about PRUCOL, but can you provide us with a little bit of context of where DACA is at in the courts right now?
Yes. Okay, so DACA was, as you said, DACA was initiated by a memorandum by the Department of Homeland Security in the Obama administration. That memorandum was challenged as illegal by the state of Texas and several other states in a Texas federal court. That memorandum has been declared illegal by the district court judge and by the Fifth Circuit, the next level court. One of the reasons why it was declared illegal was because the judge determined that it was procedurally done erroneously, and that what should have been done was DACA should have been implemented by a federal regulation with a notice and comment process. Mm-hmm. So what the Biden administration did, they said, well, we disagree, but we're going to implement a regulation. They implemented a regulation by notice and comment. That regulation went into effect in October of 2022. That is the regulation that is currently in effect. The memorandum isn't in effect anymore. The regulation basically applies to the same people who were DACA under the memorandum. Some of the processes are a little different. Mm-hmm. So now the state of Texas is challenging before Judge Hannon in the district court the legality of that regulation. Mm-hmm. And that's what's in contention. That was what was argued on June 1st. Now, while all these controversies are going on, Judge Hannon and the Fifth Circuit have issued what's called a stay. That means they're not fully implementing the decision. And what they do is they allow the Biden administration to renew DACAs, who already have DACAs, and to re-up DACAs who lost their DACA within a year, and also to accept applications but not to adjudicate them, not to decide them. Mm-hmm. So people who have DACA can renew it. And my advice to them is renew it as fast as you can. Right. So now what's up is the regulation illegal? Mm-hmm. And that's very controversial. There's a lot of legal issues involved. Three main issues. One, did the federal government executive branch, that's the Biden administration, did they have the legal authority to implement the regulation? Right. The second question is, does Texas even have any ability to bring this lawsuit? And the third issue is, Judge Hannon wants to issue a nationwide injunction, and other states have come in and said, we want DACA. Mm-hmm. DACA is good for our populations, and that includes New York and California and 20 other states. So those states are in the case arguing that DACA is a positive. Texas is arguing DACA is a negative. So while this case is pending so far, DACAs can renew, those who have DACAs that can renew. A key question is when Judge Hannon makes his decision, if it's a negative decision, and that's what it's predicted to be because of his prior decisions. People are predicting Hannon is going to say the regulation is illegal. A key issue is whether that stay is going to stay. If they're going to continue to allow, while that case is in the court controversies, these controversies are probably going to the U.S. Supreme Court. It could take till 2026 for there to be final determinations of that. It's very important, even if there's a negative decision from Judge Hannon, that stay remains, that DACAs are able to renew while all the lawyers are arguing about it.
Yes, and that's what I was about to ask. By stay, you mean while it's heading up to the Supreme Court, which could take how long?
Years.
Years for it to get there.
While it's heading that way, it's important. So that's a very important thing that the advocates are arguing for the DACAs. Now, let me tell you in the worst case scenario. So I wanted people to understand what would happen. Let's say Hannon decides against DACA. It's illegal in the regulation. And he won't issue the stay. What that would mean is that there would be a removal, a vacating of the regulation, which would mean that when each individual's DACA expires, they won't be able to be renewed. But they still will be able to remain DACA and employment authorized until that DACA date terminates. That's why it's important to try to get your renewals in. Right, so if he decided today and you still had a year before you had to renew on your DACA would continue for that year. So that,
Okay, and so I think what folks are really wondering, you mentioned that that's the worst case scenario.
Yes.
And you mentioned that folks are predicting for DACA to be terminated.
But by this judge and by the next level appellate court. There are very good arguments about why they're wrong on several bases. So, for example, does the executive, does the Department of Homeland Security and the Biden administration, do they have the ability to issue the DACA regulation? A lot of the legal experts said, of course they do. Right? It's an issue of administrative law, but there's a lot of disagreement about that. And DACA is not new. Deferred action has been in the immigration system forever. I think I told you John Lennon once had deferred action. Right? So a lot of deferred action concept is a long-standing historical practice in the immigration system. And so a lot of legal experts said, of course, they've always had the authority, they have the authority now. The second issue is whether Texas even should be able to bring this case. And that's a technical legal issue, but I think the arguments about that are interesting. Texas says we are harmed by DACA. All these other states say, no, DACA is an advantage. It's an economic advantage. DACAs are professionals, they're getting educated, and the pandemic showed us that even other DACAs were essential workers. They're contributing members of our society. And in fact, if you terminate DACA, our states will suffer economic damage. Right, that's their argument. Texas says, no, we're economically damaged by DACAs. The federal government responds and says, well, if we terminate DACA, that doesn't mean the DACAs are going anywhere. We don't have to prosecute them, right? But you will wind up in our country with vulnerable people who don't have the ability to be employed and don't have the ability to fully contribute to their societies. So that's the rub, that's the controversy there. Among the states are arguing about that.
And so in this case of the states trying to argue and figure out what is the vitality of DACA and which relates to their economic situation, their community situation, I think what a lot of folks are wondering is, what are then some steps that states can take in order to protect these communities? And
okay, so California and New York are leaders. California is much more, doing much more. New York is pretty good, but California is a leader. Some other states are doing some other things.
Right.
So one of the things you wanted to talk about was PRUCOL.
Yes.
PRUCOL is a New York concept at this point, permanently residing under color of law. That affects people's eligibility for Medicaid in New York and also affects their ability to get professional licenses and also teacher certification. So PRUCOL seems to be confusing, but if you look at it conceptually, it makes sense. So PRUCOL means, under New York law, knowledge of the immigration authorities and their permission, or knowledge and acquiescence.
And what is
So
acquiescence?
acquiescence, yes. Acquiescence means they know you're here and they haven't decided your case yet, or they are not pursuing removal.
Right.
Removal is the term they use for deportation. Right. So if you think about it, so let's take DACAs, for example. DACAs are now PRUCOL because there's knowledge and permission. DACAs have permission because of their DACA status, and then they're not undocumented because they have an EAD, an employment authorization document. They have documents,
Right.
knowledge and permission. In New York, even if DACA is terminated, New York takes the position that DACAs remain PRUCOL under the knowledge and acquiescence component of PRUCOL. So even if they terminate DACA, DACAs remain eligible for New York Medicaid.
Right.
And they also remain eligible for New York professional licensing and teacher certification because it's under the acquiescence part of PRUCOL.
And how is that codified in the state of New York versus other states like California?
Okay, this is state administrative interpretation.
Okay,
So it's done in New York State through the Department of Health for Medicaid, and it's done in New York State through the Department of Education the Department of Education controls professional licensing and teacher certification. So there's a regulation. It's an administrative regulation under the education regulations, and then there is an administrative determination under the New York State Department of Health. Each agency that controls the state benefit or the state policy makes that determination.
Okay.
And so it's important to understand, and I think a lot of CUNY students need to think about what kinds of careers they're pursuing and whether they can fit under the professional licensing components of the New York State Department of Education ruling.
And so to clarify, just kind of the final question is, this could only apply to individuals who have some recognition from the Department of Homeland Security of being in the country.
They
But if
have
someone
to, okay, let me give you another example. So there are a lot of people claiming asylum.
Yes.
Okay. If you are, if you've applied for asylum and you have an employment authorization document, your knowledge and permission.
Right.
If you have applied for asylum and been granted it, you are knowledge and permission. If you are just a mere applicant, you are knowledge and acquiescence. You're still PRUCOL because you have a pending application that has told the immigration authorities that you're here and what your claim is. So under PRUCOL, that fits the acquiescence component of PRUCOL. So applicants for DACA, applicants for asylum, applicants for temporary protected status, applicants for special immigrant juvenile. There's a whole bunch of categories you can apply for. The minute you apply, and while that's pending, you are PRUCOL for New York State purposes. It also applies to people, safety net protections and housing subsidies.
And so then, but for individuals who don't have a pathway to citizenship, don't have any kind of application they can submit for any of these statuses
They're not
listed,
PRUCOL.
they
If
wouldn't
they
be
haven't applied for anything, they're not PRUCOL.
Is the recommendation then for folks to connect with lawyers, figure out what they could apply for?
Yes.
And then
Absolutely.
identify if
Absolutely.
PRUCOL.
Now, there's some pending legislation in the New York State legislature that would do what California did, which is remove immigrant status from any consideration for professional licensing. In California, immigrant status is not a criteria for licensing. You're going to be talking to Lisa.
Yeah.
There was litigation, and the New York judicial branch of government decided immigrant status is not relevant to bar membership.
Right.
Right? So the state legislature has pending legislation, the New York state legislature, and they also have pending legislation that would make any non-citizen resident of New York eligible for the health programs in New York. They would remove the immigrant category requirement.
Right.
So you wouldn't even have to be PRUCOL.
Right.
And those are two pieces of legislation pending.
So when it comes to those individuals, it relies on the state developing these kind of
Yes,
legislation
the
to make it accessible.
states are in control of certain things.
Right.
Right, and when states are fully in control, and what they're doing is using state money, not federal money, it's the state that decides.
Okay. Jenna, we can talk about this, I think, for like another 30
Yes.
minutes. And I know there might be some questions related to what states are doing when we come back as a larger group. But I want to thank you so much for having this conversation. We appreciate your insights and your perspective on this issue. Now we go to Lisa Cho, recent graduate of the School of Law and DACA recipient. And let's meet her in our next short video.
I'm graduating from law school, first in my family to do so. It means a lot just because oftentimes there is a funnel system in higher education for undocumented folks. So as someone who's undocumented DACA, and being able to graduate from law school is a really amazing feeling, especially I did it through the pandemic, and so a lot of it is new, and I wasn't able to make as much connections as I can if it was in person, but I really did enjoy my experience, and I'm so happy to have graduated today.
Welcome, Lisa Cho. Congratulations on your recent graduation from the CUNY School of Law. So what I wanted to ask you first was, why did you decide to study law, and why at CUNY?
I decided to study law. So to preface, I wanted to do criminal law before. That was my whole degree in JJAY. But after 2017, I decided to go into immigration because I was really tired of not being a part of the conversation about immigration that pertains to my life as well as people in my community. So I decided to specialize in immigration. And then as for CUNY Law, I got a lot of acceptances from law schools. However, CUNY Law was the school that was the most affordable, as well as they gave me the best scholarship. Well, not the best, but the second best scholarship option. And I think CUNY was the place that I wanted to be to do a lot of public interest work. And their mission is for human needs and human services. So I thought CUNY was the best place for me.
Yeah. And so as a recent graduate, as an activist, kind of navigating your academic experiences, and even now as you're preparing for the bar, preparing for career opportunities, what is kind of the most questions or the biggest concerns that you get from undocumented folks that you're seeking to support with your credentials?
Yeah, so a lot of the concerns are usually how am I, what is the status that I can get? That's a lot of questions. And especially since I'm specializing in removal defense, trying to figure out in a way, my job is to calm them, but also making sure that their voice is always heard in court. So oftentimes the question is asked about benefits, what type of benefits that I can receive with X status, or what I can't receive. I think oftentimes it's a balancing of how I can make sure that they feel listened to, as well as how they can move forward and build their life here.
Mm-hmm. And so in the state of New York, the license to practice law, as I'm sure you know, is the only license and certificate that is open to anyone regardless of immigration status. And so how does DACA's precarious situation impact those who want to practice law, or does it?
So I'm going to take this as a two-part question. The first part is, whether that licensure for DACA recipient or people without, regardless of immigration status, will be removed. And I would say most likely not, just because it is a judicial decision and there's a lot of steps that people need to take in order to like dismantle this licensure for people regardless of immigration status. I also think it's quite unfair, just because you go through law school, you pay the tuition, you take your professional responsibility exam. There's no mention of like immigration status during that exam. You take, for New York specifically, you take your New York law exam. Also, don't mention immigration status, right? And all of them, and as well as the bar, and all of them accumulate in terms of money. And so it would be quite rude to dismantle this licensure just because I can't pass character and fitness, which is the main like part of this licensure that's like you can't practice if you're an immigrant, but because of the judicial decision, we are allowed to. And again, I don't foresee any dismantling of it. And then the second part of that question is like the opportunities to get into law school. I think if DACA eventually gets removed, it becomes a very difficult process. It becomes way more difficult, even though there are some undocumented folks that are going to law school without DACA. It becomes a part of like, how am I going to finance tuition? How am I going to finance all of the exams that I need to take, or like just the application fee? So that's one, like where's the money coming from? And two, in terms of career, as a DACA recipient, you can work in state and local like court systems as a law clerk. But in federal court, you can't, because of you have to be a US citizen, or you need to be a legal permanent resident and submit an affidavit or a declaration saying that I am gonna adjust my status once I'm eligible for it. So doing clerkship or just doing anything government related is gonna be a lot harder, because now you don't have an employment authorization card. A lot of times it would probably be you as an independent contractor, or you starting up your own law firm, which can be quite difficult when you are a new graduate from law school.
I'm glad you brought up kind of not just the final goal, right, the certification and license, but also the process in which folks need to navigate in order to get to the university that can grant them that, the knowledge that they also need in order to pass those tests. What I'm wondering is, like, having heard Janet's explanation about PRUCOL, how do you think this category can sustain resources for individuals who had DACA at some point and then it may be gone after kind of some additional decisions are being made by the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I think for PRUCOL, if they can just change the language that doesn't require DACA, just saying like people without immigration status, right? Because there's a section of like just undocumented folks that are left out of this conversation quite often. So it's my ultimate like goal for PRUCOL is probably like without immigration status. But if that's not possible, I think it's like individuals who had DACA or who had applied for DACA. So like the language of pass in order to keep them under PRUCOL, because again, you are deferred. Like their DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is not going to deport you or take any actions on your case. So that still falls under the realm of PRUCOL.
Do you think, to what you referenced before, as you were applying to universities and universities not providing you as much funding as you needed to attend their law schools, do you think that kind of note within their application processes, within their financial aid award processes, can still make resources accessible to this population? Or do you find that there's still additional barriers to that?
I think if law schools, because some of their funding comes from private people, like private donors, and if you can make those scholarships accessible to undocumented folks, you will essentially help a lot more people. But I do think there's a lot more barriers in terms of studying for the law, because I often describe this, the law is a very violent and chaotic place. Yeah. Like, there are laws in the book, but the way that it's interpreted in real life is completely different. And oftentimes you will like see languages that divide us, like make us subservient to, the white supremacist like groups. Right. So I think there are barriers in terms of like both your fear of law school and the microaggression that you will feel in law school. like finance is one thing, but also you have to think about mental health and retention for these individuals, because oftentimes we don't talk about retention in law school.
And I like that you talked about the retention and the experiences within the universities. I know we'll have Jesus Perez come and speak to us a little bit more too, and he'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like within the CUNY system. I'm wondering too if you're familiar with any efforts to expand public benefits to undocumented individuals beyond PRUCOL in the state of New York.
Yes, so earlier this year in the New York legislature, they introduced the coverage for all. So it is essentially putting into place benefits for people regardless of immigration status. It is to have the state fund this. So it's actually a state, like we're asking for a state program and not really a federal program. And currently it's in committee, so that means people are doing research and really talking about what this bill will look like. And I think one thing that I'm gonna say is like call all of your representatives like supporting this bill, just because it allows both healthcare for the individuals in the middle of like, you're not young, you're not under 19, but you're not above 65. So it's trying to like fill in that gap of the middle of the group where like they also experience health problems, but because they don't have health care, like they're afraid to go to see a doctor because it's quite expensive to go see a doctor in the United States. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to make sure to come back to the topic of PRUCOL really quickly to see if in your experience, how have family members or others benefited from getting benefits under PRUCOL or through the consideration of PRUCOL?
Yeah, so I believe a family member or someone close to me has had emergency Medicaid. So essentially it's like you are in a situation where you need this procedure, but you don't have the coverage, and the hospital or your doctor would apply for it. And it's no benefit, like there's no monetary cost for you, but it helps you like get the essential medical needs that you have. And then in terms of like the people that I'm working with, oftentimes I will say social workers are the heroes in this when it comes to like getting them healthcare, because they know how to navigate the system. And I think if more like social workers are trained to help undocumented folks get these, that would be perfect, because I think it's always like a roulette of like who you get to adjudicate your like case or your social service cases. So I think as long as you can have a social worker to help guide you through it, even though I know it's easier to do it like individually, yeah. I think I would feel more comfortable with a social worker helping and guiding you through this process. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it seems from the conversation with Janet and then with you that there's an abundance of resources and some potential benefits that folks can access, but it often means like connecting with the right person, whether it's a lawyer, a social worker, or even someone within an institution with a little bit more information.
Yes.
Okay. But thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you so much, Ms. Cho. We appreciate your candor, sharing your experience and your expertise as a lawyer. Now we go to a quick break, and after that, we'll talk to Jesus Perez, Director of the Immigrant Student Success Office at Brooklyn College. Welcome back to our final Beyond DACA special, where we are looking at the latest news of what's going on with DACA and the options beyond it. We spoke earlier with Professor Janet Calvo and then to graduate and activist Lisa Cho, exploring the impact of the expected termination of DACA and researching options to support unprotected communities. In this third segment, we are talking with Jesus Perez, Director of the Immigrant Student Success Office at Brooklyn College, and the supports CUNY offers to students and their families. Welcome, Jesus.
Hi, Cynthia.
As the Director of the Immigrant Student Success Office at Brooklyn College, what are some of the concerns that you see in the anticipation of the removal of DACA from individuals who may have DACA and then those who maybe never got the chance to apply or would have never been eligible?
There's a lot of anxiety, right? A lot of confusion what's going to happen. I see that the students are beginning to feel that, they need to be the ones taking action. So I think it's important for the centers and for the university as a whole to kind of take preemptive measures in terms of informing them what is like we're doing right today, letting them know what are the options, what's going to happen. It's not going to be like they're switching the switch at night and everything's going to go dark, right? So how do we prepare for them? And I think that having these conversations at all levels, right? We should be able to talk at the chancellor's level, presidents, and then faculty and staff to make sure that we all have solutions and we can do outreach with students.
Have you seen any of that manifest within CUNY?
I think as we have the centers now at John Jay at Brooklyn College, our jobs as people leading these conversations, as advocates, right? It's to bring those people to the table, right? To bring the stakeholders to the table and say, most of the students that are coming to Brooklyn College, for example, may not have had the chance to apply for DACA, for example, and they're asking, what options do we have? So we're kind of preparing for those students and kind of saying, how can we support them as they're going through this process? How can we prepare the postgraduate opportunities? And that's one of the things that we're focusing right now at Brooklyn College, in getting them to Brooklyn College, discussing what is the academic roadmap, and at the same time, preparing them for when they graduate. So I think that's part of the process.
Part of that preparation is the focus on career-based opportunities, right? And like internships that can help students post-graduation. And then one of the biggest benefits of DACA was providing a work authorization document. So individuals could be compensated for those career-based opportunities. With kind of DACA reaching its termination, with folks without DACA not having the work authorization available to receive compensation, how have you been supporting students, or how have universities like CUNY been supporting students in accessing work-based opportunities regardless of immigration status?
I've been fortunate that I've had other people around CUNY to take the lead, like yourself and over John Jay, that have established some ways to give these opportunities to students. The Dream US giving us fellowships, right? And then asking from within our own administration to say, how can we do this in-house? How can we provide opportunities, paid opportunities for undocumented students? We should be informed to see what's happening across the nation. And we should really take the lead in this conversation and say, does CUNY want to make sure to look at what is possible and how we can innovate on this system, right? Right now at Brooklyn College, we're looking at a fellowship. We got some private funds, and we're going to be offering 5 fellowships, $10,000 for 10 months for students to become advocates, to become ambassadors, and to mentor other students, and at the same time, for themselves to get some mentorship and work throughout the year and supporting the measures and the center's initiatives.
So I'm hearing, and of course I witnessed this too with the folks working at the campuses, these efforts happening to access funds to then being able to provide it directly to students regardless of immigration status. So that's one of the main barriers I think that students are navigating. The other being certification and licensing, right, which is what Janet and Lisa both referenced in their conversations. How have you seen kind of those barriers manifest within your campus as you're trying to support students who are hoping to gain access to a specific career that requires a certification and a license?
The initial conversation is when students are applying, right, and they're telling you what their aspirations will be, and they say, well, I want to be a teacher, or I want to be a nurse, and and then getting them to the place where they're going to declare a major. And I would have to say the one that breaks my heart the most is the one when they want to be teachers, right? They go to the School of Education and they say, well, if you're going to have your fingerprints taken, you may not be able to, access to certain programs, and then they come back. And you could see the lights just fading out of their faces, saying, well, we want to be educators. We were in those classrooms, now we want to come back and give back, but we may not be able to. So then we have to go back and letting them know, the students can take the classes, and there have been other students who have done it. Can you offer them the same opportunity, right? And then getting back to when they're going to do the student teaching, how to, they're going to get fingerprinted and things like that. But those conversations should not be happening. They should be told, this is what you have to do. And they should be having these conversations across the board, from the moment they enter CUNY to the moment they go into the different majors. And if we sure know that this major cannot be accessed, we should be able to tell the students, well, unfortunately at this time we cannot do this, but now this is the right way to get there.
And so I'm hearing that there needs to be more, it's not just one individual at the campus talking about these things the way you are, but everybody within the campus being informed about
It's an institutional, effort.
Yeah.
It has to be intentional. It has to be prepared, because I joke a lot, right, that a lot of the students that want to be ed majors end up being accountants. I don't know why they love accounting, Cynthia, but they come back and say to me, I wanted to be a teacher, but now I think I'll just be an accountant.
Yeah.
And they just take on that route. And you could see the student wants to be able to give back, and you have this eagerness to go back to their communities and give back. And now that light has been changed and then faded.
And so you reference it and you allude to the benefits that your office has had in being able to not only educate students that are navigating this, but departments, initiatives within the campus who are also trying to figure out how to engage with undocumented students. Can you talk a little bit more about what is the true benefit of having a Immigrant Student Success Center, an Immigrant Student Success Office at a campus like Brooklyn College?
It's a huge announcement to the world that your institution welcomes immigrants, right? It's an investment, and it tells the students and their families that there is a space for them, that all the systems that they need, all the resources that they will need to go to college, finish college and have a career will be, worked out through this center. And I've seen the process from the moment we opened, from when I went to visit you at John Jay, right? You can tell the students taking ownership of their own destiny, right? The center becomes a hub of services, and I call them pillars of support, right? We give them the ability to apply for financial aid, scholarships, to be able to have the support systems from personal counseling and wellness. But at the same time, we are creating community. And we're opening the community to all the students at the same time, right? We want students to be immigrants, but we also want other students to come in and join. And you often get to see that a lot of the efforts that the centers get to lead come directly from the students themselves. And then we become advocates, and we join in whatever the demands are coming from the students to carry the message up the ladder to the president, to the provost, to the different areas. And sometimes things are so simple as just saying, look, this form is really an obstacle. Can we work on this? And other times we really have to make the case, right? Invite you to come to the center to have a conversation with others. But I think the center really leads that part of the efforts to change and take obstacles, right? And sometimes, like I said, it really requires for people to sit down and think about how can we innovate on the things that we have, the protocols, the policies. Are they there for a reason? And maybe they're outdated. I know a lot of the policies were born out of the 80s and 90s. They really need to revisit those. I had seen those documents that were made back in, and I've shown them to you, and they were made with, before they had the printers and the copiers, right?
Right.
So they really need to think about what are we doing to make things better.
And so I'm hearing there's a lot of knowledge and expertise that can be shared across CUNY so that other campuses also have Immigrant Student Success Centers, offices, or even just have the knowledge on how to make resources accessible to that population.
Yeah, no, I would have to say, the most basic element of a center is information, Cynthia. And when we get to see the centers developing and opening across CUNY, this information gets shared.
Yeah.
And when we share information, we often, get to hear somebody else doing it in a different way that might be better than the one we're doing it. But having those intentional places of thought-provoking ideas, it's so crucial. And you know what? The benefits go beyond the immigrant student population, right? We go and, engage with student government. We engage with Macaulay Honors. We engage with all parts of the university in terms of facilitating this access to CUNY. It is in our blood. It's in our DNA, right? We're supposed to be supporting, the next generation of immigrants, and our doors should be open, and they should know that we have the resources for them.
What do you think then CUNY can also learn or teach other university systems across the country?
That as we embark on a new stage of enrollment, right, and looking at the world, there are less students, there's more competition. I think opening up centers really kind of brings up a conversation about where else can we find the next generation of leaders, right? And where students are going to come, and why should they come to CUNY, right? I always remind the parents, it's not just because we're offering you resources, it's because we have high quality education. And we have the programs that your students that, they're going to be able to utilize when they move beyond, the college years. And we give them the tools. And we want them to say, oh, I'm a proud graduate of CUNY because I was given the opportunities, whether it be in the classroom or outside of the classroom.
I wonder, too, in kind of reference of what other states look like, what other university systems look like. Janet and Lisa talked a lot about how it's the state legislation that can really determine whether someone who's undocumented has access to resources within that state. Is that something that you find has been a consistent barrier for your students?
In terms of facilitating the information that's coming from the state, or you say, or from the?
I would say, or let me rephrase the question. With states kind of bearing such a large impact and a large role in how undocumented students can access resources, what are some efforts that you may know of from the state that can support undocumented students if properly addressed.
I mean, looking at the national situation, right, and looking at the news from California, right, you know, there's this idea that perhaps the university should be able to hire the students within, right?
Right.
And just looking at different trends or different opportunities. You know, the fingerprinting part of the state, you know, the state allows the students to get licensed, right, when they graduate, but the city is the one that's keeping them from getting the fingerprint because of the Social Security, right? So just looking at the different things, and I think as the lawyers that were here before will tell us, is that something that's legal or not, right? I always scratch my head. I'm not a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer one day. But it's like, why is the state being more flexible than the city?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think having those conversations, going to Albany, rallying with elected officials is so important. And I think a lot of the dream teams, a lot of the clubs that are in the schools are carrying that flag, are saying, well, we want this to be, you know, to be available to us. One of the things that I kept saying during the pandemic, a lot of our students that were DACA were nurses, we're in healthcare, we're there, you know, and instead of celebrating them and kind of saluting them and offering them a pathway to citizenship, we just say thank you and we moved on. I think that we should be reminded that we should celebrate those people that brought us out of that pandemic, you know, and kept us alive.
I'm glad you brought up the dream teams, because I think this is maybe a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the dream team efforts at Brooklyn College. I know the pandemic kind of impacted dream team activities because there was just so much happening. And as you said, folks were often at the front lines of the pandemic. People who were undocumented were at the front lines of the pandemic, and so were most impacted by it. What are some of the ways in which the Brooklyn College Dream Team is like beginning to engage with you, with your office, and even with the Brooklyn College campus at large?
So the Brooklyn College Immigrant Student Success Center opened September 2019. We were barely 6 months into our in existence and the pandemic hit, right? So all the interactions with them were through Zoom, right? And we were able to keep this community, but it really requires that students see each other, right? Talk to each other, come together. And as you know, we started this year, you know, we were fortunate to get a program coordinator, Leslie Ramirez Carvajal, came on board, and she said, Jesus, we got to bring programming that brings the students to the center. And you know what? Let's ask the students what they want to do. And they asked to have a group, an organization, a student-led organization called the Dream Team, to kind of discuss what is important to them, right? And at the same time, to be able to be part of Brooklyn College student government, to be part of the conversations with other clubs, and to engage across the board in student life. So the BC Dream Team has been an amazing group of people innovating on their existence and their participation in college. You know, I've learned a lot from them in terms of how to manifest and how to get the things that they want to happen.
Yeah.
And it's really about persistence, resilience, and just saying, we want this to happen. Jesus, make it happen.
Right.
And it is really my duty to help them. So I have to go knocking on doors, and if people close one door, we go to the next door. And I think it has been transformative. They're catalysts. They really support the campus culture. And I think they will be key in the formations of the new centers across CUNY. The students are going to help out in the creations of the centers.
Yes. I appreciate you saying that, because I mean, just from how JJAY Center was created, from when Brooklyn College's office was created, you're right that it's the students that are kind of the key catalysts in that. And even as we're seeing in California, it's the students who are also the key catalysts in making state legislative change.
But it's true, a community requires the staff and the faculty to come together. So, you know, the ESOP Center could not exist without faculty. The Undocumented Ally faculty and the staff really gave us blood when we were just I was the only person in the office, right? So you can imagine the huge task of doing academic advising, going financial applications, working to get a grant, right? I couldn't have done it by myself. So it's thanks to the support of Carolina Bank Munoz, or other faculty members that came and I say, Jesus, let's help you out with some data. Let's create this white paper. Let's apply for Robinhood. Let's get some funding. You know, let's do some graduate school opportunity workshops. So students come in if they want to go to grad school. They're faculty members that help them. If they want to major in anthropology or archaeology, different things that we have on campus, they come and there's a faculty member willing to come to the center. And as faculty talk to each other, they also support us in our requests from administration to get funding.
Right.
And then having the staff. You know, if I send somebody to financial aid, or whether to the registrar or the bursar, having a liaison in each of those offices makes things happen, right? You're able to contact somebody, and I tell them, you are my liaison, so I'm going to ask you directly. And when I send a student, I will say one of my scholars is coming to visit you, and they know exactly what the issue might be.
Right.
So it's amazing to have a community support, because it makes the center succeed.
Yeah, and I can see how your role is so key in making sure that those people are in the right locations, in the right spaces.
Yes.
Yeah.
the willingness for them to learn. I think that's one of the things that sometimes people get stuck in thinking that they know everything of the CUNY laws and the CUNY reasons. But when you engage and you see this possibility doing certain ways and helping out, they all want to be on board.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Perez. All the resources you shared are highly appreciated. Now we're going to invite all our guests we had today to come together and respond to video recorded questions or comments from students and liaisons. CUNY Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez asked each college president to identify a liaison at each of their CUNY campuses. These liaisons serve as a supportive and informed individual at their respective campuses. We're going to go on a little break, and then we'll be right back. Welcome back to this Beyond DACA special. We've been exploring with our experts what is the impact of the expected removal of DACA and what options communities can look into. In this last segment, we have a roundtable with all of our guests. We'll be responding to several questions we got from liaisons and students. Back with us, we have Janet Calvo, professor of the CUNY School of Law, Lisa Cho, recent graduate and DACA recipient, and Jesus Perez, director of the Immigrant Student Success Office at Brooklyn College. Thank you for being here and having this important conversation with us. Let's go to our first question.
Hi, my name is Cristal de Ostran, and I'm a student service specialist at the College of Staten Island. In my role, I work with students from all immigration background, from the recruitment and admissions process to graduation and more. What can I tell those undocumented high school students, their families, and others? What can they do now to ensure that they have access to a college education or other type of vocational training that is both attainable and affordable?
Jesus, as someone who works at Brooklyn College as a director of the Immigrant Student Success Office, and you're coordinating with high school students, how would you answer Cristal's question?
The first thing I tell the students and their parents is that there is a place at CUNY where we welcome their students and their families, right? To me, it's getting them ready to think about what is the journey they want to take, what do they want to study, looking into the various offerings that we have at CUNY and preparing them to understand that there is actual funding for them, that there is financial aid from the state, that it's a private scholarship like the Dream US that they can pay. And then there are people inside CUNY who want to welcome them. So I will tell Crystal to let them know where we are, whether it be through the centers at Brooklyn or JJAY or the liaisons across CUNY, for them to start that conversation. A lot of them come in, and I will have to say the best thing that happens is when the parents open their eyes to know that we actually want their students in our campuses, and we do have resources to give them to make sure that they're able to get in, pay for their courses, and graduate. Yeah.
Yes. I wonder if folks have thoughts on that question, if any? No pressure.
I think some of what happens is people are afraid. They're afraid, and they need to be assured that by pursuing a higher education, by asking for the services and the financing that they are entitled to, it doesn't jeopardize their immigration status.
Yes.
It doesn't jeopardize their potential for regularizing their status. That's a fear. People don't understand that, yes, you can go to college. Yes, you can get the financial aid that you're entitled to. Yes, you can get the health care that you're entitled to. And that's not going to adversely impact your potential for regularizing your status in the future. So I think that message is not clear to a lot of parents and a lot of high school students. And that needs to be more strongly expressed.
Yes, I think so too, because I wonder if you experienced this, Jesus, or even Lisa, that especially when public charge was happening, that became kind of a major question from folks asking, like, if I get state financial aid, will I never be able to qualify for a pathway to citizenship?
I'm glad you're mentioning it, because I know when I say it, right, I talk to the parents, but then I usually ask them to do a screening with the CUNY Citizenship Now lawyer, right, just to see if there's any relief that it can have. And they're the ones who send that message about this is not going to impact you, and then he carries weight because he's a lawyer, it's an attorney that they can trust. So they can hear it from me, but then when they hear it from the attorney, we have Luz Medrano in our office, when she tells them, then it becomes real, right, that, oh, it is something that is not going to impact me, and there is a lot of fear and anxiety.
If I can add to Cristal's question, because what I was hearing a lot from our students in the Immigrant Ambassador Program, and I'm sure you remember Jesus, is that the focus for a lot of undocumented youth in high school became, well, I really need to work, or or my parents really need me to work, and so I don't really want to go to college, or I'm being told not to go to college because even though I don't have work authorization documents, I need to provide some kind of income to my household. I wonder, like, what folks would recommend communicating to students who are kind of deciding, like, should I work now or should I go to college?
For me, it's a personal decision on, like, especially like family wise too, because I know like there were some people when I was at JJAY who were like working as well as being a student, and then sometimes when they can't pay for the semester, they take that semester off to work for money, and it just delays their graduation. And obviously nothing is wrong with delaying graduation, but it becomes harder and harder to get your degree because your heart is split on like financing or like supporting your family and supporting your education. And I think one thing is like having liaisons, having centers to tell them these are the scholarship opportunities. Because when I was at JJAY, Hispanic Federation like gave us Metro cards, pay for some of our tuition and groceries, and that alleviated a lot of stress from the students. And if that program could continue to like all of CUNY campuses to continue alleviating that like financial barrier, that would be great. Because again, we're asking 18-year-olds or sometimes older to take on financial loans like that at a very young age when they can't even drink until they're 21. So I think our system of having college cost so much is such a barrier for like just everyone from low income all the way to immigration status. So I think just telling them that there are scholarships out there, I think putting yourself out there is probably the most difficult part about trying to attain your education, because you have to tell people that like, I can't get financial aid, like federal financial aid because of my status. And then it's like, I have to come out to someone in order to get money when like these resources should be accessible to anyone.
Everyone should know about it, not just those who are directly impacted by it.
And the conversations that happen, Cynthia, right? You know, it's usually around this time that young people find out that they're not documented, right? And then the parents are on the defensive, trying to protect the reasons. And it becomes really critical when the parents start saying, well, you need to provide some money to the household, right? So, you know, I always try to be respectful to the family dynamics, but I want to make them, you know, aware and understanding the dynamics of the educational system, right? Whether they want to go to college or just get a vocation or, you know, trade, for them to be informed to make those decisions, right? And to say, this is on the table for you. It's not going to impact your immigration, your future. But as a parent, are you playing the, you know, for the short term or the long term game? This is what it means in terms of dollars and cents. This is the dynamic. Even the educational system, it may be very different from where, you know, where we come from, right? Different people come from other countries. The educational system is very structured that if you come out of high school, you go into medical school, you go to law school, right? So in their mind, it's a very different game, and it's more years. So just explaining the lay of the land and creating a roadmap, giving them the resources, and then letting them see, well, this is what you have. Choose what's in the best interest of your family is always key in having that conversation.
I'm hearing a combination of like, how can we fully inform folks, because there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of just fear that folks may have in engaging with an educational system, so that they can make their own decisions, right? Like a fully informed decision.
And the timing.
Right.
Right. So it may not be right for you this year, like you said, right? So come back when you're ready, and I'll be here. And for them to, oh, you know, I came last year and I wasn't ready, but now I'm ready. And that's always, you know, you prepare, you get the tools to do that. When they come back, then they're ready to go.
Let's move on to the next video.
Hi, my name is Serena Hardy, and I am from Gutman Community College. My questions are, may you identify local organizations where students may find support within their community or neighborhood? Second question, does CUNY plan to establish relationships with local organizations to maximize student support outside of college? Thank you.
So I think Serena's question, I imagine she wants to learn a little bit more about trusted local organizations that you all relied on or have relied on to inform both students, parents, and yourself through several fields of like academic interest. I wonder if folks have any recs.
I have mine, but I want to give a chance.
Are we thinking of the same one?
We might. I don't want to steal it from them, but
So the first one that came to mind is the New York State Youth Leadership Council.
Yes.
They have amazing resources on their website, and they also have like happy hours as well as just like groups where you can talk about your shared experiences as like either an immigrant daughter or like kind of like dismantling masculinity in your culture. I think they're an amazing resources. They were very present when I was an undergrad. And I think you just follow them on Instagram, their website, they're amazing. They also have really good merch, by the way. I love their tote bags. And then the other one is the Ming Kwan. I think for more like Asian specific support and community, they're a great resource. You definitely have to reach out to them a little bit more than like just follow them on Instagram, just because they're not as open about like whether they have community events to support people who don't want to do advocacy but just want to be a part of community. So I think those are definitely two like really good resources if you want to be a part of the community and learn a little bit about your status a little bit more. Yeah.
you know, I couldn't agree more with the New York State Youth Leadership Council. They're amazing in building community with other students, right? In just letting them navigate life. Right, they have the Undocumented adulting and all those programs that they offer. I would add Make the Road New York. There's a place that I often communicate with students to connect. There's also Mixteca in Brooklyn or La Colmena in Staten Island. But across the city, there are many organizations that the students sometimes come to me saying, oh, I come from this organization, and I wanted you to know that I can come back and bring information. So it's important that we connect from CUNY to the community, because I often say we have these walls around Brooklyn College and these fences, but it's really, we are in the middle of Flatbush, and there are a lot of immigrants living in there. We really need to have them come to the office, to the center, even if they're not students, but just to have a conversation about navigating life in New York City.
For people who are interested in being lawyers, the law school has a really good pipeline program for students. There also, periodically at the law school, there are programs for high school students to consider, do you want to be a lawyer? They often participate in mock trials. There'll be a trial practice course, and then the whole jury will be high school students or college students. So there's a way to integrate into some of the CUNY programs. A variety of them do a good job, and they have access kinds of programs to about it. Bar associations, there's local bar associations. So there's a lot of different organizations that are very supportive of people who are interested in becoming part of their profession. If that's, there are supportive organizations for people who are considering being doctors or nurses, so they're oftentimes connecting up with those organizations, if you're thinking of those pathways, are important.
And I can add two as well. So I know. So one I'm thinking, which I think is a well-known national organization, but I think is helpful to highlight recent resources, is the Dream.US Scholarship, right? So CUNY has a relationship with the Dream.US Scholarship, meaning that students who are eligible can receive full tuition coverage, and they get like a $750 stipend every semester. Recently, that relationship has been expanded, where now if the campus signs up for the fellowship program, students can also receive money for unpaid internships outside of CUNY. And so some of our campuses have signed up for that, but for individuals who may be interested in that, it means reaching out to the liaison, reaching out to the centers, the offices that exist, to see if that campus is participating. The second organization that I'll say is the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. So the chancellor is a member of that, so are a couple of campus CUNY presidents. And so this is more of an informational organization. They have several webinars, events, conferences, but I think is an incredibly well-resourced, well-informed entity that can benefit administrators knowing about it, because they can then use that information and bring it back to their campuses. I think one document in particular that they have on their website is for more risk-adverse general counsel and financial auditors, they have a document that stipulates or explains a little bit more about the legality behind providing paid opportunities to people regardless of immigration status. So also thinking of that as a resource.
Yes. Oh, and they also have a really good interactive map to let you know what states offer in-state tuition for folks regardless of immigration status, as well as which state is allowing state federal aid, which is really cool.
Yeah.
I'm also part of that. I completely forgot.
People are considering different depending on their problems. So, for example, if you have healthcare issues or problems with your insurance company or access issues, the Community Service Society is fabulous, and they are very good about that. The Legal Aid Society is very good. Latino Justice is good. The Asian American Legal Defense Fund is good. On a lot of these larger immigrant issues, the ACLU has a fabulous immigration group. If you sort of, MOIA, the New York Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs is also a good resource. They have a lot of good information on their website. Healthcare access, Health and Hospitals is excellent. They've done a great job in providing healthcare regardless of immigration status, and they have a lot of good information. Their community health workers, their doctors, their receptionists are all trained to include immigrants regardless of their status in the healthcare access programs. So it's government programs too have not only local not-for-profits, but some of these government entities are really putting a lot of effort into providing access.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
I would add one more. Okay. Immigrants Rising.
Oh, yes.
Has an amazing website, and they have resources not only to pay for college, but to start your own business and all the different. It's an amazing place, a website that they can visit.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And I believe we have our last question from Mahir.
Hello, my name is Mahir, and I'm a rising senior at Queens College. I'm curious about a potentially high needs population, undocumented alumni. Throughout my college semesters, I've met multiple undocumented alumni who emphasize the lack of post-graduation support that's available to undocumented and immigrant students at CUNY. Many, in fact, believe that the university did not play any role in their lives after graduation. And so that brings me to my question. If CUNY is able to successfully adopt a similar campaign to the UC's Opportunity for All, what steps can and should the university take in order to reconnect with its undocumented alumni and actively support them in their professional development? Thank you so much.
So in Mahir's question, I'm hearing three different topics, right? One is the engagement or lack of engagement of alumni who are undocumented or in various immigration statuses. The second being if CUNY is able to adopt something like the Opportunity for All campaign that the UC system is recently engaging with. And what are then some steps to reconnect with alumni after kind of this is established? So I know it's a three-part question. I wonder if folks have any kind of initial thoughts on any of these parts of the question.
Well, I can talk about it from the law school perspective. So when people graduate, the traditional view of dealing with alums are, let's get the alums to contribute money, right? That's the traditional view. But young alums need continuing support. And their contribution can be through mentoring. Their contribution can be through participating in forums. Their participation can be organized by alumni offices into interest groups. So at the law school, we have a group, for example, of immigration attorneys, people who are interested in being an immigration attorney. It's supported by the law school, and people help out each other. But there's a way in which the alumni-focused office helps organize and coordinate, and a lot of it's just done online through email. I'm on that email just so that I can see what the issues are, help out when I can help out. But there are simple things that you can do like that by having the alumni offices view the young alumni not as just contributing money, but needing assistance, but also being part of the life of the school. And several of those people, you can call them up, they'll help out in a current student that you have, they'll help each other. It's a great way to do it. So that's one suggestion.
For CUNY Law, before I was a law student, apparently there was a program in which if you're a recent graduate and you're starting your own law firm, you can use an office space in our law school. It's so nice. Like there's cubicles and everything, and there's like a private little red box for you to have like meetings on Zoom. But again, we go back to the issue of funding. Like the program is no longer like present because of funding. Like there's some alums that are still using it, but we just need funding to restart this program. And I think across all campuses for alums, like offering them an office space for their career development. Because I know in this time of pandemic, a lot of people are still working from home, and it's a lonely place to work from home. And if you have like a communal space for people who are in early developments of their career, just supporting them, like giving them printing access, internet, computers, like it could be so beneficial for young like graduates, because oftentimes they don't have those resources to meet the same like competitiveness as people who are citizens or legal permanent residents.
I just have to say that I hear my here, and I hear other students asking the same question, and I think we're not utilizing our career officers to the best of the past capacity to deploy them to support students beyond graduation, and getting that message that Professor Calvo mentioned before from top, from the chancellery down to the colleges, to say there are opportunities for undocumented students. These are the pathways that they can be able to get employed, whether it be, through the UC system, a way of doing it, or getting them the tools necessary for them to open their own businesses, to open up, their own practices. And I think that's, again, thinking of the innovation that we can have. And I think having your office, the creation of the policies, streamlining the information, is key. And it can only cement what the university wants those donors to become. I always say cultivating those people when they're young will yield donors in the end, because they benefited from the resources that we have. So when I see the students, when they're looking for support, I'm helping them. I always say to them, remember that there are others coming behind you, because at the end we're going to support each other that way. So I think it's a huge, again, investment in having the support for undocumented students to have career opportunities, because in the end they're the ones that are going to go for the next generation and support the ones that are coming behind them.
Yeah. Oh, I would also like to implement like professional clothing too for recent graduates, because CUNY is known for supporting a lot of low-income communities, and oftentimes like they don't have the necessarily professional clothing necessarily for interviews or just like day-to-day jobs. So like also investing in that to make them also like be ready for the world, because I often think we're not really ready as soon as we graduate from college. We just lose our student status, and we're adults now, and I don't even know what that means.
Yes, and I think what I'll add to just what folks were saying was, I think engaging in the alumni, especially undocumented DACA different status alumni, is particularly important for current undocumented students. So I'm thinking of within my office, there was an opportunity for current undocumented students to be partnered up with undocumented CUNY alumni in various fields. So one of our students was in the School of Film, I think that's the one in Brooklyn College, and was paired up with a filmographer student who graduated from that same school who's also undocumented. Another student is interested in building their own business, was paired up with another CUNY graduate who has created their own business already, Grant Answers, right? And so each of these students were able to connect with someone who was in the same situation they were, and that student felt like they were able to ask them questions that they weren't typically able to ask the career services folks. So questions like, should I be worried about deportation if I create my own business? How should I incorporate my family in this, because I'm also interested in supporting their retirement efforts? And so I think engaging with the alumni also allows current students to feel safer and more heard within the campuses. I wonder if folks have any experience with kind of connecting those two groups, or if
the mentoring
the mentoring component
is very important. It's done it could be more formalized. It's done on an informal basis.
Yeah.
In fact, I know my faculty does it a lot. They connect up this student with this graduate to help them figure out their pathway.
Yes.
We have judges who are like, they're very wonderful mentors. You know, you pick people who are good long-term experienced people who are mentors, but also sometimes the students need to talk to somebody who's 2 or 3 years out. What is their pathway? Where are they going? And that's done in a more informal way, and I can see from what you're saying, it could be more formalized, it could be more institutionalized, and that's the mentorship is terrific.
It goes a long way,
Right.
because I want to talk about the event that we had at Baruch with the Dream US support and your office support, right? We brought students who were actually doing things outside, right? And they were being successful in the different things. And for other students to hear what they're doing, right? That there is life after college and they have the opportunities. It's motivating, it's infusing you with passion to continue because there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? So I think more programming that's intentional will definitely help.
Yeah.
Great. So with this last set of responses and comments, we close our show. Thanks to our panelists, thanks to the students and the liaisons who sent their recorded questions and experiences, and thank you for watching the I Am a Dreamer special, Beyond DACA. Please tune in for more I Am a Dreamer specials and look for our segments on the Nueva York show. We love to uplift the voices of immigrant people and communities who are affected every day by U.S. policies. And so for more information on finding these resources or support in navigating this journey as an undocumented student, visit our undocumented and immigrant student programs at cuny.edu/immigrant. I'm Cynthia Carvajal.